Hello, I'm Adrian Gonzalez, president of Adelante SCM, and it's great to be back as your host for this July 22 edition of Transporeon Journal. You've probably heard the phrase, may you live in interesting times. It's supposedly a Chinese curse, although there is no verified Chinese source for the phrase. Nonetheless, to live in interesting times, per the curse, is to live in times of trouble and uncertainty. I think we can all agree that we have all been living in interesting times since 2020, starting with the COVID-19 pandemic, which is still with us, through the current Russia-Ukraine war. The reality, however, is that uncertainty is not something new that we have to deal with. It has always existed, and it is here to stay. Of course, if you work in transportation, you already know this is true. It is a market that goes through cycles continuously, and there are many factors and variables that impact it, many of them outside our direct control. One big factor is overall economic conditions, which are deteriorating at the moment. According to the World Bank's latest Global Economic Prospects Report, published in June, global growth is expected to decrease from 5.7% in 2021 to 2.9% in 2022, significantly lower than the 4.1% that was anticipated in January. The World Bank expects growth to hover around 2.9% over the next 2 years as, quote, the war in Ukraine disrupts activity, investment and trade in the near term, pent-up demand fades, and fiscal and monetary policy accommodation is withdrawn, end quote. Looking at specific countries, the Bank of France now expects the country's economy to grow 2.3% this year, down from its March forecast of 3.4%. And as reported by Reuters on June 21st, Germany's BDI Industry Association cut its economic growth forecast for 2022 to 1.5%, down from the 3.5% it had forecasted in late February before the Russia-Ukraine war began. To make matters worse, as reported by Reuters, Eurozone inflation rose to a record high 8.1% in May, more than 4 times the European Central Bank's target. According to the article, while a 39% rise in energy costs was the main driver of inflation, unprocessed food prices were up 9% and non-energy industrial good prices rose by 4.2%. The price of services, where wages are a key cost, rose by 3.5%. Inflation in the UK is even worse, reaching 9.1% in May, a 40-year high. According to a CNBC article, along with external shocks facing the global economy, such as food and energy price surges amid the war in Ukraine and supply chain problems due to lingering COVID-19 pandemic bottlenecks, the UK is also navigating domestic pressures, such as the unwinding of the government's historic pandemic-era fiscal support and the effects of Brexit. Speaking of inflation, crude oil and diesel prices remain significantly elevated compared to a year ago. The price of Brent crude oil is about 50% higher now than in June 2021, hovering around $111 per barrel today. On the morning I'm recording this episode, I took a look at diesel prices on Transporeon Insights. This metric shows the pump price in euros, inclusive of all taxes, for 1 liter of diesel fuel in the origin country of the lane selected. The diesel price is updated once a week. Over the past 13 months, for example, diesel prices have increased 75% in Russia, 74% in Austria and Bulgaria, 72% in Spain and Latvia, and 70% in Romania. In the past 3 months alone, diesel prices have increased 86% in Russia, 64% in Hungary, 20% in Slovenia, and 16% in Bulgaria. Considering that fuel is the second highest operational cost for carriers after labor, the more diesel prices continue to increase and the longer they stay elevated, the greater the financial burden for carriers, especially smaller carriers and those that are unable to fully pass on these increased costs to shippers. On top of all this, shippers and carriers are still dealing with the after effects of the lockdowns in China due to the COVID. According to a June 20th Bloomberg article, empty container boxes crucial for Asia's exporters are getting stuck in the port of Rotterdam as a growing backlog of undelivered goods at Europe's export hub forces ocean carriers to prioritize shipments of filled boxes. The article goes on to say that, quote, although authorities in Shanghai lifted restrictions in June, shortages of vessels and delays at European ports are forcing export goods to compete with empty boxes for space on ships headed to China, threatening to send a further wave of disruption to Asia, end quote. In addition, there have been labor strikes at the ports of Hamburg and Antwerp in recent weeks, adding to the operational challenges these highly congested ports already face. So, as we enter the busy and summer-fall shipping season, the uncertainty and disruptions continue. Looking at the truckload market, while there are signs here in the U.S. that truckload capacity is loosening up and rates are coming down a bit, especially spot rates, capacity in the European market remains constrained and contract and spot rates are still increasing in most lanes. For example, looking at the capacity index on Transporeon Insights on the morning of this recording, the index was 85.9 in May 2022 compared to 89.1 in May 2021. A reading under 100 indicates a capacity-constrained environment. So year over year, the index has decreased 3.6%, and compared to January 2022, when the index was 87.9, it has decreased 2.2%. This is contributing to higher spot and contract prices. The spot rate index, which tracks the spot rate across 70 major lanes in Europe and weighs each lane according to its transport performance, was 143.1 in May 2022, a 27% increase from May 2021. And the contract price index, which tracks the contract rate across the same 70 major European lanes, was 120.7 in May 2022, a 20% increase from the previous year. Similar trends are evident in specific lanes. For example, on the morning of this recording, if you look at the Germany to France lane, you'll see that the spot rate is up 30% year over year and the contract rate is up 22% year over year. You'll also see that the contracted load rejection rate is at 19%, which is 5 points higher than a year ago, and the spot offers index is pretty much at the same level it was a year ago at 71.85, which means that about 28% less carriers are making offers for spot loads on that lane. In short, the transportation market in Europe is very different from the US market at the moment. For sure, the Russia-Ukraine war is having an impact. As Eric Coolidge at American Shipper reported in March, Ukrainian truck drivers working in Western Europe are abandoning their jobs to return home and fight the Russian army, exacerbating a labor shortage that will make ground shipping more difficult. And as I've highlighted in previous episodes, further implementation of the EU mobility package, which requires truck drivers to take longer breaks and return to their home country every 8 weeks, is likely having an impact too. So what does this mean for shippers, carriers, and logistics service providers? It means that we'll continue to live in interesting times, that the market will remain volatile and uncertain for the foreseeable future. It means that the days of setting and forgetting a transportation strategy and routing guide are over, at least if you want to remain competitive. The same is true for carriers and freight forwarders when it comes to their pricing and go-to-market strategies. And it means that the time is now for data-driven decision-making in transportation. This was the focus of a research report we produced recently in partnership with Transporeon. I encourage you to download and read the report for all the insights and advice related to this topic. The good news is that for companies that are willing to become more data-driven in transportation, the data and tools already exist to get started. For shippers, real-time market data and intelligence helps you to answer important questions like, how do my contracted rates compare to others in the market? How do they compare to spot rates? Are my tender rejection rates higher or lower than other shippers? Are spot rates and spot offers trending up or down in a given lane? How about contract rates? Do I need to secure capacity in new lanes and or new modes in response to market events? This type of benchmarking is also very valuable for carriers and logistics service providers, particularly when it comes to evaluating and updating their pricing strategy for spot tenders and contract rates. Just like shippers, carriers and logistics service providers have questions that they want to answer. Questions like, what rate should I offer for this spot load? Are my rates competitive on this lane? And where are the best opportunities to increase margins? Real-time market data, coupled with machine learning and other technologies, can help answer these questions. For example, if you look at the new Rate on Demand service on Transporeon Insights, it predicts all-in buy rates for full truckload transports on the spot market. The service takes in a variety of transport parameters, including postal codes, loading and unloading times, vehicle type, industry, and loading, unloading stops, and uses a machine learning model that accesses all of the data on the Transporeon platform to predict prices in most of the EU 28 countries. As an example, for a full truckload spot shipment to load in Ulm, Germany on July 4th and unload the following day in Amsterdam, the Rate on Demand feature estimates it would cost around 1,109 euros. This is just one example of how when you layer business intelligence, analytics, artificial intelligence, machine learning, and visualization tools on top of real-time market data, you open the door to new insights about the transportation market and your operations. Well, that's all the time I have for today. Thank you for watching this edition of Transporeon Journal. I'll see you again soon.